at its simplest level, like defining our purpose, defining our values that we think we can do in our stupidity and arrogance, but actually we can't.
And there's nothing wrong with individualism if you have a clear sense of purpose and personal ethics.
Which brings me back to your question around courage. And I think courage has got a lot to do with togetherness.
But if you have the surrender required in step one, you get that. And so I was, I was like, okay, so I've got to live a spiritual way of life. I've got to start caring about people. I'm not the center of the universe. I'm going to start doing that. And it absolutely was transformational.
There's a gentleman called Robert Anthony who said the opposite of bravery is not cowardice, but conformity.
So I like the idea of ferocity. He defines ferocity as a combination of grit, objectivity, and discipline.
Hi guys, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm actually really excited about this webinar because I think we really lost sight of what good looks like. And, I think we've got a great opportunity to get back there. And I'm really delighted we've got Nick Brown, who's a good friend of mine, and Paul Regan, a good friend of mine, who are really quite passionate people on this particular subject, come at it from a completely different set of angles. So what sparked this was a discussion that Paul Regan and I had, and we started talking about professional development. And then we realized we really know nothing about what we are as people. And then we had a very open and frank discussion about what professional development might be. We then kicked off a series which was all about what's humanity all about? What is it to be human? And then Nick was in the audience last week, and he commented around some points. And then the common link, I think, is that all three of us care. So I thought the next thing, or we consider the next thing we could do is to talk about why do we care. So that's really the crux of this. So both Nick, Paul, and myself are going to talk about why do we care. So Nick, just give us your introduction. How do you see what's caring all about? Then let's take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I was really interested in what Paul and you had to say at the last webinar, particularly Paul's thoughts around whether you were brought up in life in an environment where you trust people, or whether you were brought up in life in an environment where fundamentally you think people are bad. And I think when it comes to opening your heart out to somebody and developing trust and caring, if you fundamentally don't trust them, this is a problem. And I've had a bit of a think about this, and there's some stuff in a book that I'm writing about this, which that there's a gentleman called Robert Anthony who said the opposite of bravery is not cowardice, but conformity. Okay, so people that are brave enough to care are prepared to stand up and make a difference. People that have been beaten up through their lives and don't want to do that tend to keep their head below the parapet and go for conformity. And I think that's a fundamental thing. As a manager in business, recognizing which comfort zones your staff have, or indeed in your family and your life as a whole, and kind of where that line is. Because it's important, because if you want to move people from a situation of what we call in our Chamber of Commerce, we call converting knowledge into know-how. So taking your learning and how you convert that into something which actually solves problems, as opposed to being, somebody who knows all the answers but doesn't actually do anything. Yeah. Then you better be able to do that with other people in order to push power down the organization for your solutions to be sustainable. So I think I have a sort of a grid in the book called the care quadrant that talks about bravery and conformity and knowledge and know-how as the four corners. And obviously, if you have bravery and knowledge, you can move into know-how. But if you're not brave enough to start taking risks to put things into practice, then you go along the bottom and you're very much in that land of waiting for someone to tell you what to do all the time. Right. And the difference is, and the things are, aspiration in the top left, because you aspire to do it. If you feel that you don't have to do it, there's a kind of entitlement element to it. If you move into along the bottom into conformity and no know-how, then really you're scrounging because you're getting paid for not solving problems. And in the top right-hand corner, we've got bravery and know-how, which I think is about determination and persistence. And you use the word grit, and I think it's a very good one. And on that note, coming back to your own thinking, I will pass back to you. But those are the thoughts. How do you get people to care for each other so that they feel comfortable in taking risks so that you can drive businesses forwards and innovate?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Nick. That's a great scene setter. Paul, what are your thoughts, my friend?
I like that. I like I love any conversation about courage. I think one of the things that we can all do, it's kind of like one of those old earnest words that we don't hear enough these days, is encourage each other. I had a great relationship with a high performance coach called Alison Task. Quick plug for her. And one of the, really and truly, even though she was a great task, one of the most profound things that I got from her was a sense of emotional security that came from sort of like, the insightful encouragement of a very smart and caring woman, professionally boundaried. And, one of the things that I found is that there's a certain part of me, I do a lot of my work's based on design. And beauty, and women, a lot of the time women respond to beauty in different ways that men do, and it's really, I work for my clients, and my clients are happy with what I do, but a lot of the time I don't get it to put it out in the world. And so I really like to share it with either my pastor, I've got two pastors at my church, they're husband and wife, and if I showed it to the guy, he'd be like, oh yeah, that's nice. If I showed it to Kiralee, she loves it. And I've got this other friend that I'm working with who's an accountability partner, who's this top flight corporate chick in strategic alliances for IT, which she's now branching out. And and I'm working with her, and I showed her my stuff, and she loved it, and that's nice because I kind of enjoy that, and I kind of need that for my emotional development. I'm an artist. I've created someone. I don't need a standing ovation, but it's nice to have someone say, "Wow, I really like what you did there." Yeah. I think that a word that I really like, and Stephen Kotler. If you look up ferocity and Stephen Kotler, you'll see that he's written quite a lot about that. And I like ferocity because I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. No prizes for guessing that my attachment style is dismissive, avoidant, and so I like the idea of ferocity. He defines ferocity as a combination of grit, objectivity, and discipline. And I really like that. Jocko Willink, who's someone that actually I've done some work for Jocko, but who's been a big inspiration for me. He always talks about default aggressive. And he's not talking, he looks like the kind of guy who'll just sort of like walk into the room and shoot someone in the face. It's like, it's kind of not that, but but it is always, it's always being on the offensive. Because in actual fact, you've got more choices. It's like you can choose you can basically choose to go throughout life being proactive rather than just being reactive. If you take that, and part of that comes from the Facebook post for Jocko's whole theology, which is up before the enemy. He's always posting pictures. He's probably still doing it today on Twitter. He posts a picture of his watch with the fact that he gets up at 4:30 a.m. And if you look at my alarm's at 4:15 a.m. So I want to get up 15 minutes before fucking Jocko. In the same way that Jordan Peterson's always talking about clean your room. So I like the idea of ferocity. I like the idea of courage. How do we care? I thought about how I could answer this question briefly. And, in 2 or 3 sentences, I hope I can traverse, how I originally thought about. I didn't care. For most of my life, I just didn't care about other people. I was an addict in active addiction. I was functional until I wasn't. I worked in advertising. I loved booze. I loved Coke. I loved certain other things attached with that kind of lifestyle, particularly if you lived in Southeast Asia, if you were working in advertising, if you had a big expense account. Sure, I don't need to draw you a picture. My lifestyle was very, very hedonistic. And I got clean 10 years ago. And when you do that, you're kind of like dragged kicking and screaming into the kingdom of heaven. And you have to reassess your value structure. And I did that through working the 12 steps. And, you know, the 12 steps is not like male initiation, which is one of the reasons society is in the mess that it is today. Typically, male initiation, I don't know if we talked about this last week. If we did, just let me know. You know, whether you look at sort of like Vikings or Aboriginals or sort of like, you know, American Indians, the aspects of initiation for men were very, very similar. The adolescent was taken away from the women. The women were all kicking and screaming. They kicked up a huge fuss. The boy was put in this circle of men. He was kind of slapped around a bit, you know, given a bit of, you know, given something to drink, which made him violently ill. Or a lot of the time that drink had something in it. So there was a shamanistic aspect to it. He was stripped naked, slapped around, given a stick and chucked into the bush for a couple of weeks. So he came back sort of like, you know, half dead. You know, what did they, you know, same thing. They sort of slap him around and then cut the end of his dick off. And the whole ordeal is meant to teach you a few things. Well, number one, your life's not about you. Number two, life is tough. Number three, you're not important. Number four, you're not in control. And number five, you're going to die. Now, I wish the 12 steps taught you all those lessons. They don't necessarily, but what they do is they teach you to change your orientation from self to others, okay? And the way they do this is they say your best thinking got you here. You had all the control over your life, and you've ended up in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's where self-will has got you, and you can't really argue for that. Well, you can, and people do, but if you have the surrender required in step one, you get that. And so I was, you know, I was like, okay, so I've got to live a spiritual way of life. I've got to start caring about people. I'm not the center of the universe. I'm going to start doing that. And it absolutely was transformational. It's sort of like, you know, when I'm working with clients, when I care more about their success than my glory, I mean, that changes things completely. I got baptized 3 years ago, and this morning I was on this great call with a guy called Morgan Snyder, who is the spiritual son of John Eldridge. And John Eldridge set up Wild at Heart Ministries, and he wrote a book called Wild at Heart, and a second book called Fathered by God. And like, he is the you know, he's a cross between sort of like Iron John and St. Francis of Assisi, and he's really he's an incredible leader, and he's all for a robust masculinity in Christianity, which is sort of like, you know, certainly in the US and the UK over the last 100 years has really diminished. You know, manliness is seen, you know, Jesus is basically seen as a man in a dress with a beard. It's become very, very feminized. And John and Morgan aren't all that about that at all. And this morning, Morgan was talking about something that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks, but not in these terms. He was talking about we're in a period now of hyper-individualism. I think last week we talked about narcissism and the effect of social media on narcissism, and he said we're in this hyper-individualism, and and he's an American, and it's kind of ironic that, because, you know, America is possibly the most individualistic country in the world. And there's nothing wrong with individualism if you have a clear sense of purpose and personal ethics. And I would say those are tethered to allegiance to the Christian God. Then it's okay. Then you can go out and you can be the pioneer, and you can do all the stuff that you need to do to build a country as formidable and successful as the US. But if you're just out running for yourself, then you just become Bishop Barron, who's one of who's the original gangster when it comes to sort of like, Catholic evangelism on YouTube. He's great, and his Word on Fire ministry. He talks about a culture of self-invention. This idea that we can invent ourselves, and we kind of can to an extent. But look, I don't want to turn this into a plug for Christianity, but when you're a Christian, you're part of the grand narrative of history, right? It's like you were conceived and you were known about in the Garden of Eden. We all belong in history. Once you come to Christ, then your book is written. Your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. You can start reading about what's going to happen in the rapture and Revelations. You live in history. Sorry, you exist in history, and you will live in eternity. There's this incredible. You can read at one level you could read the Bible, and any character there, if they're one of the good guys, you go, oh, I'll be meeting him probably in about 20, 30 years. You know what I mean? It's like there's this crazy tapestry to life that faith gives me. Okay, and it gives me a sense of how I exist in the world, but how I exist in history, both on a physical plane and on a spiritual plane. And that I run a fairly successful practice as top tier creative director, and have done for a while now. That doesn't mean to say that I can't do stuff that sort of like expresses my personality, for a reasonable profit. I can. The thing that I try and do more and more and more, and the funny enough, I find the more I do this, the easier my work gets, is I just try and do it for the glory of God, right? And I try and impress God more than anyone else. And I find that when I'm doing it for God, and I did this as a spiritual discipline really clearly for this brand, I can barely boil an egg. I'm super undomesticated, and I had to do this Christmas campaign for Sunbeam Sultanas here. And I'm like, okay. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do this for the glory of God. And I did it. And I wrote this couple of scripts that were really nice. They were really, really, really sweet. And I put them together, and my designer made them look fabulous. And the client loved it. And I was like, if I'd thought about that myself, I would have come up with something nice for sure. That's what I do. But it would have probably taken 6 to 8 hours. This took about 2 hours with that frame. With that mental framing, doing it for the glory of God. So that's what I care about right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's really insightful. I think there's something maybe we can think about as a sort of wrap up around what, courage, what creates courage. But my thoughts on this. I mean, first of all, just pick up some of your points, Paul and Nick. We are not conform. We are not, as individuals, we are not. There's no conformity between us. We're so unique. And I think what does good look like? I think it is about being wild at heart, and that's about freedom. And I think, how do we get there? It's about what matters to us in our unconforming type way, and actually then actioning that. So are our beliefs and actions aligned? And if they're misaligned, then we're conforming to some external influence that doesn't suit us. And I think the great misgiving about Christianity is actually it's all about freedom. It's not a set of rules. It's actually complete freedom, but it's also provides that pyramid, that structure right at the top. And quite frankly, in terms of strength, if you've got God on your side, who the hell is going to take you on? So I think, and I think the other great misnomer is people misconstrue love, because God is love, but God and love is the only indestructible emotion, but it's thought to be soft, and it's not. You try letting go of anything it requires huge amount of courage. So I think, and Jesus by no means was anyway shape or wet either. So I think it's worth just looking at what's the opposite of this, and I think there's some real threats and challenges. So I think for a start, we're completely losing sight of what good looks like because of wokeness, which is absolute opposite of being yourself. It's about victimization. It's about the antithesis. Technology too manipulates us quite heavily. And I think corporates, frankly, have just create cozy environments, and there's no difficulty. And difficulty, Paul, you talk about, and very much, is my world in the turnaround, is where you learn. And quite frankly, the worst possible place is a place of ease. And I think a lot of these technology companies got too much money, just too bloody easy, and they'll probably never learn. And that's really tragic. And what happens is they create these mantra and these idols, like mental health or diversity or whatever it is, inclusivity, which just miss the top pyramid of what good looks like, which God is good, which is what you just described, which is about aligning with our purpose. And then this thing start working. So if the hypothesis is God is our creator, right, we miss and we follow that model, then actually there's a good chance that will work if that is true. And I think a lot of these efforts around mental health, actually what it does, it creates a lot of noise which goes nowhere, which get intellectualized and completely miss the point. And that was, I think, the trigger, Nick, Paul, for us having this discussion around professional development, which is actually the thing that came out of the pub originally. We talked about the challenge and leadership skills, but then realized that the leadership skills were completely shot to pieces. So I think identity matters as well. So how do we define our identity? If we are a son of God, then that's simple. We've got responsibility.
Yep, exactly.
Else, who the hell are you?
We represent the kingdom.
Exactly. Else, who the hell are you exactly? And actually, have you got the ability to define your values? No, you haven't. Have you got the ability to define your purpose? No, you haven't. If you listen to the really big thinkers on this, it just isn't possible to do that. So what happens is you either fit into this tyranny, which is what Nick was talking about, which is around conformity, or you step out into this frankly Christian world, which is about freedom, and you rediscover yourself. And I think it's not an irresponsible sort of discovery, because you really have got accountability. So, and I think the other thing with this is disagreement. So, how do we disagree with each other? Because if there's no challenge between us, if there's no free speech between us, we don't have freedom to be ourselves, then how are we going to rationalize what's right or wrong, or even factual? And I think, who actually defines what's right or wrong? And if you take Hitler, for example, who's an extreme example, he actually did quite a lot of factually good things, but he got a lot of things which are dubiously morally wrong. But actually, are any three of us on this call really qualified to define was that right or wrong? We simply aren't. We have our view, and morality is certainly, guess what, external. It's like something tapping on your shoulder saying, look, Tom, that's probably not quite right. And I think the tragedy as well, which I pick up, which I really find, which is one of the things that really causes me to care, is people who do care are actually the people who are suffering in this situation. So there are people who I've known locally have committed suicide, and I think it's because they can't stand the lies and they can't stand the lack of backbone and the persecution, and they get marginalised. And being marginalised is the worst possible place to be. So,
yeah,
I think it's really around some pretty simple things. For a start, frankly, as a model, I think what practically works is loving God and then loving other people, and that is all about putting other people first. I think at an individual level, what that means is we take an interest in different views, show grace to people, we value them for who they are as individuals, and then when we are reliant on teams as well. So when we engage with each other, we become more productive. We learn from each other. We check our own truths, which I think is the crux of why technology and Bitcoin's gone so absolutely bonkers. A friend of mine was telling me this week that someone just bought one of those digital images, and it's just been sold for 25 grand, just been sold for 125 million. Absolutely insane. And this no one's challenging this world, and so it becomes very unhealthy very quickly. So I think the notion of love and is being soft is an absolute nonsense. It's about getting to the truth. We don't have the ability to do that ourselves. We're reliant on others, and without free speech, we're absolutely knackered. And at its simplest level, I mean, the first commandment is to love God and love other people. And quite frankly, if you do that, and from which you've got a job to do, then everything else follows, which rather ties in with what you were just saying, Paul, about what's the problem you're trying to fix. And actually, and I've spoken to politicians about this. I've spoken to, it's really interesting. There's a few businesses I've turned around, for example, microfinance, which can get absolutely overrun with greed because it's very easy to take advantage of vulnerable people. And it's highly regulated. And anybody that comes into this without a Christian heart, quite frankly, just gets overrun with greed. And it always goes wrong. And I said to this politician I met and said, look, frankly, unless you put God at the center of this business, you're absolutely knackered. And we did that.
Yeah. Good.
Staggering. We had staggering results in terms of putting our customers first, really showing a heart for them. And rather than just raising two fingers, and which is what they could do, because once you've broken that relationship, they will not pay you back. So from a very practical perspective, I think this really matters. So that would be my contribution to this. So any thoughts, Nick, on anything that's been said today?
Yes, no, very much so. So I think I admire your and Paul's faith. As you know, I was brought up in the Christian tradition, but I think one has to be careful with these things. I think that there are an awful lot of people out there that don't share your faith, or who have a different God, or look at wars and battles back through the years. And if we're going to do a comms strategy to try and improve things generally, that comms strategy must cater for that. And I think that really just building on what Paul was saying about ferocity and grit, objectivity, and discipline. When we first started talking about this, we were talking about what it was to be human. And one of the things that I think is that we are, one of the things that joins us all together, which is what is going to matter increasingly in this world, is that we are all human and we're all out of Africa, regardless of our religion or our race or whatever people have tried to use as mechanisms to control us since. And I think that the more I think about this, the more I think that we tend to think of ourselves as being parents or doctors or our job role or children or whatever it might be. It's a much better plan to think of us just in terms of our life stages as we go through and the things which we're doing. And in the chamber, we're doing a lot of stuff with business sponsoring things in the local community to give people the confidence to work together, because you change the way people think by changing what they do. And we're actively doing that in the press, and it's working very nicely for us. And I'd like to leave you with this thought. So in the community, we think about being human, but with a can-do attitude. Okay, and if you look at the way that Google and Musk and all these guys are recruiting people nowadays, they're recruiting them on the basis of what they can do and the problems they've solved rather than their qualifications. And I think that's appropriate. And in the business world, we think of being human at heart with a can-do attitude. In the business world, we think of being human at heart with a performance focus. Okay, so the ability to be up for doing stuff, but then make sure you're doing things which align with the values of the brand and all of those good things that push power down an organization. I think if we can take those two thoughts forwards in terms of practically changing things to build our self-belief, then your relationship with God becomes a very personal one. And that's a matter between you and whoever it is that you want to speak, but you are improving the lot of the people around you. And most importantly, you are raising the quality of debate, which is the basis of democracy and civilization. And that is the price that we're paying at the moment through the whole wokeness bit, because people are just running away from it. And I understand why they're running away from it. And we need to give them the confidence to stop running away. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Two thoughts. I would say that sort of like I think the trope that religion creates division is not as powerful as people would make out. I'm trying to think who said this. It was can't remember if it was Douglas Wilson or who's that guy who wrote that book. Really smart gay guy. The Fall of Western Civilization. Not Ben Shapiro, but a guy called Doug something or other. The statistic is only 6% of wars were actually fought over religion. We generally fight over other things, and it tends to be sort of like power and money. which links really neatly into what I think is at a meta level the most prevalent. The reason, if you said, okay, which sin is causing society to crumble at the moment, I would say it's the sin of envy. And envy is not a nice sin, because all the other sins, you kind of get something for it. I've stacked on the weight over this COVID season. So let me tell you, gluttony, right? I'm kind of paying the price for it. But gluttony, when you're in it, is pretty good. So's anger. So's lust. Okay. So's sloth, right? There's a payoff. But envy, there isn't a payoff. All right. And envy is not the same as jealousy. Envy is not the same. If you're envious if you're jealous of someone's wife, you're thinking, wow, or their lifestyle, you're going, wow, I wish I could have a beautiful wife and, drive a sort of like silver roller and what have you, have a beach house. But if you're envious, you just want to burn that to the ground. That's the dog in the manger thing. And I think that's what's driving society. I think that's what drives socialism. I think that we're herd animals. And I don't think our brains can compute with the idea how business can scale. So I don't begrudge Elon Musk making his millions. I mean, I really don't like Jeff Bezos very much, but I can't see why he's this ghoul that people paint him out to be. But I think people simply can't get their heads around how someone can make so much money. It just doesn't fit with our wiring as hunter-gatherers. And I think so much of what's wrong with society today comes from just sheer envy. Yeah. People seeing, and I think that creating a victim culture is a manifestation of that, because when you've got a victim culture, then you can dress up envy with the moral high ground. And if you're a victim, then you can actually have the moral high ground without doing any moral development. Yeah. So that's just my feedback on that.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think thank you very much, Paul. I think, Nick, I'll just respond. I think, well, this is obviously an open discussion. It's a challenge in terms of free speech, okay? So this is a no holds barred. And what Paul and I are sharing, and I appreciate your view, is what we have found worked, okay? And my view very much was your view probably 10 years ago. Just so happens like, my thinking's moved on. I think the challenge with this is there are things we can do and things we can't do. And I think when you look at someone like Jeff Bezos, and I have looked a little bit, and as I understand it, he is obsessed with stasis. His greatest fear is stasis, right? And he does realize he's likely to trash the planet. And a lot of these things, unfortunately, do come back to the Bible. So what does the Bible say about this? It says it's a gift from God to appreciate what you've got. And quite frankly, without that, you're into the scope of what Paul was talking about, which is called greed and or envy. Envy is for sure the cause of most wars. And I think there's a situation occurring at the moment which is getting extremely difficult with a lot of unintended consequences, like sustainability, which is all around trashing the planet and excessive consumption, greed, etc. There are challenges like China, which is the antithesis of Western culture, which no one's talking about, no one's got the courage to talk about. And there's a whole raft of ridiculous unintended consequences, which I think are a consequence of taking the right action. Now, if we think we have got the infinite ability to resolve that without having a centered moral compass that we could that is beyond ourselves, then I think that is just an absurd notion. So I think the other thing is as well, I've been in situations where simply you cannot cope. There are things you can do, but most people can't cope, okay? And I've been at the threshold of that. And I've noticed that at its simplest level, grace and love are the two key traits. And again, those are just by coincidence biblical things. And it's not because I'm some sort of church going fool, it's because I turn around companies. I just find that it works. So I think from a very practical perspective, I think this, by taking new action, by having the right center, then I think we're getting somewhere close to what good looks like. I think that said, a lot of the world, oddly enough, is very cozy. And so I think there's an element of tragedy and difficulty that's actually required to give people the necessary incentive to move some of these agendas on. And I think the technology businesses have got so much cash and they're encouraged to burn it like it's a bonfire, and they have so little difficulty and so little pain that they're very unlikely to be stopped, which is again has corrupted the investment world. And so you've got this self-fulfilling thing. And quite frankly, if we think we can solve that moral dilemma ourselves, I think we're just completely stupid. So that's the reason why I'm talking about my faith, because I don't see any other. I don't see any other moral compass to guide me in these ridiculous situations without the grace and love of God. And also recognizing that, as Paul and I mentioned before, that we're all pretty bloody stupid as individuals. We're all utterly useless by ourselves, and often what we think is wrong, and we're highly reliant on our communication. So I think there's that's the essence, I think, of caring. Then just one last question I've got. In terms of, we touched on courage. Just a couple of bullet points, just to wrap this up. What are the two traits that are going to give us courage to do things, do you think? Because Nick, when you and I spoke, I said to you, the connection between you and I is we both care. What is it, the two bullet points do you think that really matter, Nick? It's courage and caring.
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to just come back very in a couple of sentences on what you were saying earlier. I think what we have done today, if we've raised the quality of debate, which is good. Yeah. I think that whatever it is that works for individuals at a personal level, I encourage, and that's a good thing. And people come from all kinds of backgrounds and where they're going to. I'd like to ask the question: what do we think God is going to do tomorrow as a force for good to change things? Okay, because my belief is that if we don't do it, it probably won't happen. And so, however feet of clay we have, and I spend a lot of time in my book talking about the moral compass and how we gain experience and build confidence to do things, which brings me back to your question around courage. And I think courage has got a lot to do with togetherness. And if we have a shared vision and a shared set of moral compass, then the belief that we can do things because we feel included and because we feel involved, the empowerment piece, which is about ground up change, as opposed to government mechanisms for top-down control that tend to exclude you from taking initiatives, then I think that is the driver for courage. And if you look at the reason why people go over the top in the First World War, et cetera, they didn't do it for Britain. They didn't do it for the army. Yeah. They didn't do it for the man next to them. They didn't do it, for the country. They did it for the man next to them. They did it because of togetherness. And I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. I think that's quite a big question. I think maybe we come back to that in the next series. But yeah, great. Any final thoughts, Paul, before we wrap up? You're going to the pub now, eh?
No. I'm going to I'm going to go home and feeling a little bit dehydrated actually, so I'm going to drink a ton of maybe soda water, maybe kombucha. No, I mean, a good question. What's God going to do for me tomorrow? He's going to provide me two things: spiritual energy and guidance.
Yeah.
I always like to tell my sponsees, have you used your GPS, your God positioning system? Okay, I can pray, I can read the Bible, I can have conversations. I like to define prayer, well, not just me. I mean, I heard this in a meeting somewhere, but I like to define prayer as any time you're talking to God, thinking about God, or talking about God. So I think this discussion has had a prayerful element to it. And prayer, how I've just defined it, gives me clarity on what I think and what I think I should do. And the other thing is just spiritual energy.
Yeah.
It's like when we were talking about hyper-individualism, it's like, when I'm when I was out for myself, it burnt up a lot of psychic energy.
Yeah. Right.
That's why I had to do all that coke. That's why I had to sort of get so smashed to sort of get me through things. Yeah. But when I'm acting in congruence of God's will for me, which is something that I try and orientate myself to on a daily basis, it's natural, it's flowing, it's intuitive.
Yeah.
Even if it's the stuff that I don't necessarily want to do, I kind of know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you, for me, working a spiritual program and having a faith, one of the best things about it is I need to know what to do when I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I have that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. That's really good. I think what I'd say is that the danger, Nick, just picking up on what Paul just said, is that if we don't love God, what do we love, right? So Paul just described for men, what do we love? The alternatives can be quite grim. It can be money, it can be it can be women, it can be drugs, it can be alcohol. So I think that compass is important. So
the moral compass, absolutely.
I think business left to its own devices at the moment can be seen to be trashing the planet and lots of unintended consequences. But yeah, fantastic discussion. Thanks, guys. Really good to catch up. Thank you very much, Paul, for contributing from Australia. And yeah, to be continued. We'll decide what we're going to talk about next week. Cheers, guys. Have a great day.
Last one. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers.
Cheers.